So I'm here with Mary-Frances Garber, who is a genetic counselor, a licensed genetic counselor, and is on Courageous Parents Network advisory board. And we wanted to get her insights for our community at a time when, with the COVID virus running and wreaking havoc on the world, it is also wreaking or has the capacity to wreak havoc on our nerves and our individual well-being, which certainly has the potential to threaten the family well-being. And we have heard from families at CPN that they're struggling with anxiety, and for some, the COVID is triggering some trauma reactions and PTSD. So we wanted to bring Mary-Frances in to talk with us and therefore talk with you, the CPN parent community, about how to sit with it, how to be with it, how to survive it, how to cope. So thank you, Mary-Frances, for joining us. How can we help parents identify or recognize the triggers that are being brought up for them with mandated physical and social isolation? And then, the follow-up question would be, do you have any strategies to help them cope with that?
Well, first, before I answer the question, I just want to thank Blyth and CPN for allowing me to have this conversation this morning. And, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on the virus or managing our emotions or anything like that. Basically, I've become more knowledgeable in what I'm going to share with you today from having traveled with families through these years on their genetic journey, and having been witness to you becoming experts and you managing your emotions while needing some support, but really still being in control. And if there's any take-home message from me today, it's really that, rely on what you've done already and rely on the successes that you've had so far in your families. So in terms of the question, really, anxiety is really fear of the future. And I think what we're all dealing with right now is this fear and unknown. And I actually think those are the triggers. Feeling scared and also not knowing really where is this going, how long are we going to be in this house, just this whole concept or this whole shadow of the unknown. I think those are really the triggers, and this unpredictability that we've been dealt with. Now, I also have come to understand that what we've dealt with in our past truly influences how we deal in our present and our future. And so positively and negatively. So for families who have been given a genetic diagnosis and live in some fear and some unknown already, either that experience is going to make you more capable and stronger, or you're tired and exhausted from it and feeling like, how much more of this can I do? And so this past experience is going to influence how you deal with the current situation. So recognizing, as you have in the past, when you're starting to feel a little bit out of control, and you know better what that is. You know the feeling of anxiety. You know the mornings when you wake up and your chest just doesn't quite feel right. You know the feelings of letting your head go there when you really should try to keep it here. So those are some of the things to be watchful for. So what do you do when you start to have 2 or 3 mornings in a row and you're feeling that? Some people do have a prescription to help with that. Other people don't. Talk about that. Wake up. If you live with somebody that you can share that with, say, you know what, I'm feeling like this today. I just need to how to say that. Maybe that person feels that way too. If you don't live with somebody you can share that with, phone a friend. Everyone is in this together right now. And even though people don't always pick up the phone and share that with you, lots of people are feeling that way too and would welcome to talk with you about that. So some strategies about the triggers of the fear and the unknown. I really think distancing ourselves from the media and clicking on things on the computer and having the news playing in the background, I think that is helpful sometimes. You cannot have that on all the time. It overtakes daily life, and it is scary. The bottom line is it's scary. So distancing yourself from that a little bit, trying to stay in the present, trying to focus on what do I need to do today? Really, what are my tasks today? Some tasks, and what are some fun things I can do today? And really not going too far into the future with that. You know, I think that you'll hear me talk a little bit this morning about journaling. I think that's a really helpful tool, a strategy, a tool. Journaling allows you to take your thoughts and materialize them and release them onto the paper. And if you journal, if you write the way you think, okay, right now I'm just feeling so scared about this. I don't actually know what to do. And if you write that, like it's like a release, not journaling, that's how I want you to write. Taking the feeling and the way it's running in your head and putting it down on the paper just like that.
And is part of that is the value, I mean, it's when you and I were talking before in preparation for this conversation, you identified that there are a number of benefits to journaling. Certainly one of them is the way I think of it is like you're sort of, you know, putting the icky thought out, dumping it out, or, you know, crassly put, vomiting the thing that's making you sick in your head out onto the page, where now it's on the page and it's out of your head.
Yeah.
Ideally, you can say now it's out of my head, it's on the page. And you, which I intuitively recognize as being beneficial, but you also said that there's another benefit to it, right?
Yeah. I think also reading it back. You know, personally myself, I've done some journaling at different times in my life. And I think when you pick up that little notebook and you read back your thoughts and where you were, and for some people, you've progressed. By the time you read it again, maybe you're in a different place. It's a new day. You have different emotions, and you can say, wow, look where I was and look where I've come. Or you could say, you know what? I see that this is almost a little chronic struggle that I'm having. When we're stuck in a place and if something becomes chronic, it sometimes is a good time to reach out for some more help or some more support. So using the journal as sort of like a roadmap of where was I and where am I, that can also be helpful.
Now, hearing you describe that, where was I and where am I now, it reminds me of actually the journey parents take when they get the diagnosis or when they think something might be wrong with their child. And that, so in some ways, we as parents in the network have already done a version of this.
I hope so. So, you know, I work.
Not necessarily the journaling, but we've done the adaptation.
Oh, yes. But I hope some of those families have also done the journaling. You know, I meet with many families when they receive a diagnosis for their child or when they're on the diagnostic odyssey and they know something is not quite right and they're waiting for the test to come back or a physical exam to help with a diagnosis. And I tell everybody to write it down. I tell everybody to write this down because your mind doesn't always remember everything about those difficult days and those struggles. People might want to share it later with their typical children as this is our story. And so I'm hoping people have been journaling, but I know not everybody, A, can make the time, and B, has been coached to do that, as I do with my patients. But what you're saying is families who have been on this genetic journey with their child or with a chronic illness have been moving forward. You have to move forward one way or the other, and some families can do it better than others. Again, their past dictates how they deal with their present. So yeah, I think that, like I said before, I feel like you already are the experts in managing a lot of this, but this is uncharted territory now. And so it's easy to doubt yourself. But I think recognizing those times and triggers, whether it's reading or the news, or even Facebook sometimes, it can be pretty scary.
Do you just said something around having doubting yourself, and parents of these children are typically required to make a lot of big decisions for their child, and there's a tremendous sense of responsibility that comes with that. I mean, certainly for any parent, for any child, but especially when you're making decisions around medical treatments and therapies and interventions and types of programs that would benefit your child. There's a lot of decision making, and doubt does not help us when we are in a position of having to make decisions. And do you have other suggestions, or how we can process the doubt voice in our head? And I'll give you a very specific example. I mean, maybe there are concrete, it's a case by case situation, but a case where a parent, your job is to keep germs out of your house, and you've had nurses and become very dependent upon the wonderful home care nurses that you have. And now you recognize that these nurses leave your house every day, go out into the world, who knows who they come into contact with, and can you let them back into your house the next day to take care of your child? And that's a big decision with a tremendous amount of responsibility around it, responsibility for your child, responsibility for you, because you need the nurses to free you up, and then also a sense of obligation to the nurse for whom this is their livelihood. So like that's an example of a decision. How can we make decisions like that? I mean, I'm not saying there's a right or wrong decision, but how can we make a decision and then feel okay?
Yeah. So, and obviously I'm just going to answer the question. I think that, professionally, I don't have an answer for that in terms of the medical care that people are going through individually, and people, should really consult with their child's doctor for some of this, I think, too. I think the biggest thing is, even though you don't feel like you might be doing a good job of this right now, is to trust yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that goes back to the voice of the doubt, because everybody feels a little bit overwhelmed by this. And how are we going to manage, and how long am I going to have to be making that decision about opening the door or not for my nurse or my care team? But even though you feel the feeling of self-doubt, or just having a feeling of insecurity about this, like, trust yourself. Like, you've made really good decisions for your child or your children in the past, and you will rise to that occasion and do it again. And nobody knows their child better than the parent. And if you think about the situation, and I would even say get out a piece of paper and 2 columns, mm-hmm. and say, yes, I let the care provider in the door. No, I don't. What are the ramifications of my decision? And just because you don't let them in this week, I mean, there's this whole 14-day thing right now. Now, the only thing about that is, even though we're in our house for 14 days, the person coming to the door isn't. They're exposed. So a lot of times when I counsel couples all the time and patients all the time about decision making, and the bottom line is, a lot of times we have to make the decision that we feel best about at the time, and that might only feel a little bit better than the other choice we have. So neither decision might feel right now. You might not feel so good about letting the care provider in to help you, and you might not feel very good about not having them come in because you want the help and you want to, you know, like you said, that person's become a part of your family. So realize that you just want to pick the decision that might feel just a little bit better.
Mhm.
Trust yourself, and you've done this before. You've made decisions before, and that you will do it again. And you know, mantras are a big thing. I have some patients out there, hopefully they're walking around in their homes saying some of these one sentence mantras that I've coached them to say in the past. And you know, I can do this, or trust myself. And if you have somebody else there that you navigate your decisions with, you know, talk it out, you know, sit on the couch and do that. Again, there's no script for this, and the unknown is very strong, but you've made decisions before, you've navigated things before, and trust yourself is my big message for that.
Mhm. I like that so much. It's a that sort of mantra, it deactivates, it changes the channel, doesn't it?
Well, you hope so, right? You know, it's so easy. Do I practice all of these things that I share with my families? You know, I try to. I mean, everybody has struggles in their life, and so it's easy for me to say this. It's easy for me to stand up at the podium and to talk to medical providers and encourage them to share some of this with their patients. Oh yeah, I can say all of this, but the reality is people are going to be in their homes watching our conversation, and I just want people to know, easier said than done, but if you can just take a little bit of this and even find one or two things that get you through a few more days, and you find some of it encouraging, then that's good medicine.
What are thank you. What are some signs that a parent might watch for in themselves that they're in danger of spinning out in that moment? Like you know, where a parent could say, ooh, this is me being very anxious. This is me not helping, trying to be helpful, but not being helpful. I recognize this. I need to pause. I need to do a reset or something.
Yeah, step away. Yeah. So I've taken care of a lot of couples where, or even women, individual women. So anxiety lots of times manifests itself in like anger. And so our fuse becomes like really short with our children and our partner. So if you find yourself like snippety or yelling, then you probably need to step back and like go sit on your couch in a different room a little bit for a little while and try to reset. Sometimes I take care of people that, you know, start drinking more than they used to. And sort of to numb, you know, 4:30 comes and they're like done with their kids and their family life, and so they start pouring some wine, and sometimes if there's another person in the house they point it out, and sometimes if that person's alone then it goes unreported or unnoticed. But you know, if you see a wine bottle by the stove that's decreasing much more rapidly than usual, I mean, those are the kinds of things like that you don't want to do. Make a fun little, some kind of other kind of little drink in a pretty glass, and but you have to be watchful of those things, and because we're not going out, nobody else is there to report. It's like self-reporting. It's like saying, okay, so I need a little help with this right now. Um, those are two things that come to mind. Impatience, feeling really impatient, yelling, um, even not yelling, just being a little bit not so nice.
And you also had said to me, and I could imagine this with myself. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, I do remember that. Behaviors that are indicative of when you feel a loss of control, which in the face of the unknown, over which we have no control of the outcome, a loss of control would be a natural reaction, is part of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to bring control into other zones. I remember when Cameron was alive, but approaching, I mean, she was just getting significantly sicker, and I knew that time was not on our side. I decided I needed to eradicate all the dandelions in the back of our backyard. I needed to dig up by the root every single dandelion, which in that moment I did not think was bizarre behavior. But in retrospect, I mean, not bizarre. I think it was understandable, but it was a transplanting my control. I couldn't save my daughter, but I could get those dandelions out of my yard. I imagine that a similar behavior might be like cleaning your refrigerator as if your life depends on it, kind of thing. And that might be another thing you see. And frankly, maybe that's not such a bad manifestation, because now you have a clean refrigerator and you haven't screamed at anybody.
Yeah. No, that's another example, sort of displacing what was going on in your house. You went outside and tried to clean up the yard of the dandelions. But yeah, waking up in the morning and making a little list of tasks for the day that you feel like you can control something. You're going to accomplish 2 things on the list in addition to what you do with your children and your home. 2 other things. Lots of people right now don't communicate via phone anymore or an old-fashioned letter, and everybody relies on texts and just one little line that you put on a Facebook. But this is the time to, connect with old friends and family that you can't get to, and maybe write an old-fashioned letter. Things like that could also maybe be a little helpful.
Mm-hmm. You said something to me yesterday when we were talking that I just loved. The put down the wipes. I thought that was just a really nice put down the wipes. And
yeah, so we were talking yesterday a little bit about because we have to rehearse this a little bit. This just doesn't flow for Blyth and myself. We did have to talk a little bit. So the question, I guess, that we were talking a little bit about was sort of being hypervigilant and OCD sort of kind of thing. And, everyone went out and bought all the wipes and anything with the word Lysol or Clorox or anything on it. So I don't have any of that in my house right now.
That's probably just fine.
Okay, I hope so. But on the other hand, people whose children are more susceptible to infection, and people who just live in sort of a medical environment, even though it's not medical, and want everything to be disinfected for the health of that child and the other people in the family, because if they get sick, then the child could get sick. So people sometimes have those concerns anyway. And now that concern has been lifted exponentially, like the curve. And so some people have that little canister of wipes, and they're going to the refrigerator and to the knobs and to the counter and to the bathroom knob and everything. And if you are doing that, if you're scared to the point that you are sort of going a little bit over the top with your wipes, you have to realize you've probably wiped enough for today, and it's okay to put them down a little bit and get the blanket and cuddle up with your child and read a book or watch, Barney or whoever you watch in your house. And you've probably done a very good job with the wiping for now, and not to feel that that's the only way you have control. I think people are wiping because they feel like that's going to give them some level of control and decrease the chance. Everybody wants to decrease or mitigate it, but you want to control some other things too. You don't want these days to go by and not realize, wow, we were like a little nuclear family in our house, and we really want to take advantage of that time. But I was just wiping like all the time. So you could think about that a little bit.
I love that, Mary-Frances, because I will say, I don't have very many regrets about how I spent time with Cameron, but I actually do really regret that I spent a lot of time in my backyard taking out dandelions. I mean, it's just, I have compassion for myself. I have a lot of compassion, but I do think, because I also had other children in the house, I could have been inside with them too, but I was out in the yard taking out dandelions. Now, I could have been on a 10-mile run, and that might have felt more productive than this thing I was doing, but that particular purposeless activity has stayed with me in a way that is not, it's one of the few things that is a thorn in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is actually.
Regret. You've got some regret and you've got some guilt around that. Both things I'm hearing. And you know what? Like you did what you did at the time, and you needed to get out of the house. You needed to, as much and as cute as Cameron is and was, you needed to look away a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
People need to take a break, but you were doing this sort of weird, now looking back, you're like, that was a little bit weird. And that was a little bit, what did you just say?
Unproductive.
Yeah. And so now, years later, you can look at that and realize that. But at the time, maybe you had a little spade and you were just like putting the spade down below the root and pulling it up. And it was a release and an escape. And,
yeah. What would you say, Mary-Frances, to a parent who says, this is all very well and good, and it makes sense, and it's reasonable, and I get it, but at the end of the day, it is my job. My child is depending on me. Mm-hmm. My child's health and well-being is entirely dependent upon me. And at this time, like on a good day, I have to be vigilant. But in the age of Corona, I have to be hyper vigilant and on high alert all the time. So I have to be on high alert. Like this behavior is part of what it means to be a responsible parent on high alert.
Yeah. So if that mom or dad was with me, obviously I would ask some questions about, so talk a little bit more about that, tell me why you feel that way and illustrate for me what that means. And I might say, wow, that sounds like you're not leaving time for, anything else, for your other family members, for that child, for you. Does that sound productive to you? Or does that sound like it could end up being counterproductive? Because I would argue that, there's 24 hours in a day and maybe we're awake for 16 of them. So how many of those 16 hours do we really need to be hyper vigilant about what you're describing to me? You have to take a break. You cannot constantly practice that way, like parent that way, like live that way. And because of what I do and because of who I take care of, and I've even had some friends, like very close friends, who've had children with life-limiting illnesses. And so I didn't have just the genetic counselor perspective. I had the friend and the neighbor perspective and went in those homes. And so I get it. I don't get it personally from my children, but I've been close enough to it that I really understand that feeling of hypervigilance, needing to control the situation that you're not controlling. You're not controlling this. But I would ask you to write and think about that. Like, why do I feel like I have to exhaust that as fully as I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, based on my own experience and hearing you talk, and then knowing other parents, that when we do pause and reflect and probe, we can trust ourselves to be reasonable with ourselves. But we need to create those moments to reflect.
Mm-hmm.
The pause, the putting down the wipes, to ask the question.
Yeah.
And then trust. So be the person who can ask his or herself the question and pause, and then trust that you will ultimately arrive at the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, in this moment, just let it go for now, or do something else, and it will be as okay as it can be. Well, I have found this very helpful, talking with you. I suspect, or I suspect we may be talking again, because we might need a tune-up of this conversation. And I know that we can call on you again to do this, and I thank you for that. And I think what we will do also is we will invite parents to send us questions and concerns that, if it's appropriate for you to address, they're not of a medical or technical nature, and you feel like you have something to say about them, we will get on Zoom again and hear what you have to say about them.
I think that's a great thing that CPN is providing this outlet for families at this time, and is bringing on people like me to provide a little bit of insight. And the last thing that I want is for anybody to be sitting in their house feeling incapable, helpless, and struggling with that self-doubt. And so, above and beyond these little vignettes and these videos that we're making, if you have medical providers or counseling providers that you usually see and that you cannot get to right now, we need to find other ways for you to get that care. And I know that a lot of providers in different states are all moving to telemedicine from outlets such as, not necessarily Zoom, but some of the HIPAA compliant outlets. And so I would say, please, please, please talk to your provider about that opportunity. Even genetic counselors, or even in my practice, I've moved to all online visits to counsel people who feel like they need some ongoing support. And I'm not talking about reproductivity and genetic issues. I'm talking about some of the things, listening to people's concerns so that they feel less alone and just have somebody to sit with and discuss these issues with. And if you need more information about that, I'm sure CPN can get you my contact information.
Yeah. All right. Yes, we can. Thank you, Mary-Frances. I'm going to stop the recording, stop the conversation, and I really appreciate your availability and your kindness and the care that you are offering in this way.
Thank you.
Stay well.
You too.